Egypt's exports of medicines have risen by 35% for the first time in the nation's history. This according to the chairman of the Medicines Authority, Dr. Tamer Essam, who said the local manufacturing in the field of medicines is witnessing a great boom. And then he added that there's no medicine in the world or vaccine that is not being manufactured in Egypt. From North Africa to East Africa, Kenya's Information and Communication Technology Authority, ICT, is rolling out a plan to connect all public schools with internet by using Kenya's power transmission lines. The ICT Authority is collaborating with Kenya Power, the Ministry of Energy and Communication Authority, to boost learning and teaching. So far, Kenya Power has connected over 22,000 schools with power. Joining us to discuss that, plus PAPSS, is Sandaye Okoli, the CEO of Alpha African Advisory. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Good to see you again. Welcome back to the show. Yeah, I do want to start with, before we get to Egypt and Kenya, we just played that clip in the prior segment. How do you see the Pan-African payment support system working for the Intra-Africa Trade?
Well, clearly it was required. I think at the time, as you know, they've done it in partnership with the Africa Free Trade Agreement body, because if you're going to trade, you need to exchange not just goods, but you need to exchange money.
Right.
And how best to do it? Because right now, as was mentioned, we've been very much dependent on what are referred to as third currencies, the dollar, the euro, and the pound, which slows down the whole process, makes it a lot more expensive. So it makes a lot of sense. The big question in my mind is the exchange rate, essentially dealing with transparency of exchange rates so that, one, people get access to the data. They know, for my Naira, what do I get in cedis, what do I get in Kenyan shillings, et cetera, et cetera. Because right now we all keep reporting our FX rates vis-a-vis the third currencies, and not stating it relative to, excuse me, to other African currencies.
That's right. That's right.
So there's that availability of data, but also clarity as to what those exchange rates will be, and managing the ups and downs of FX. Fantastic.
I want to ask you about something that's been discussed on the African continent to facilitate trade, single currency. If that perhaps, I mean, PAPSS is fantastic stuff, but I guess to facilitate more seamless, and I know this is a complex issue, but I just want to get your thoughts on, whether doing what they've done over in the Eurozone, a single African currency can make easier trade.
So the last time I gave my thoughts on the single currency, the Echo, on Arise TV, I think it was the summer of 2019. I got absolutely pilloried.
I'm sorry about that. Let me apologize.
Brave and talk about it again. My view was we've got to be practical. Yes, in theory, it makes a lot of sense, but in practice, how far away are we from being able to successfully implement a single currency? Because each African is sitting in their own country today, knows the existing challenges regarding their economies, regarding their FX rates, and when you look at the difference in size between some of the different economies, and look at how the disparity between growth rates, inflation rates, et cetera, when we're talking about ECHO, there are particular targets the countries participating have to meet in terms of FX rate, et cetera, et cetera. And several countries were far off. So I think whilst walking towards the single currency, I think this is a practical and solid first step.
I don't think you can get pilloried for that answer. That balanced answer,
it's
you can't get.
I can take it.
You can take it, right? While we're discussing payments and seamless intra-African trade, I still want to throw in the infrastructure discussion as to whether that side of it, whether that has to be in order to get us to ports and all that stuff, roads.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, payments for goods and services, you can almost consider the last mile. But how do we get there? The reason why people today still buy a lot from outside the continent when they could actually get it from the continent is often to do with the cost differential. So until we can put the infrastructure in place for us to be able to produce things at a cost-effective rate, there will still be that tension. So infrastructure is 9/10 of the...
I can imagine. Thank you so much for that. I want to take it to Kenya. And what do you make of this, should I call it ambitious plan for the Kenyan government that wants to give internet to all public schools?
Well, the concept of using existing utility structures to layer on the internet is not new. It makes sense. Even here in Lagos, we have gas link, there are different areas where it has been looked at. Key question in my mind is who's spearheading this? So I can see from the government's standpoint that they want to ensure that they do have the internet in schools, both public and private. I can see that for that to happen, it needs to be done in a cost-effective manner so that it's not too burdensome for the public schools. Because if you don't have it in public and private, you continue to have growing gulf between the education of people in different stratas of society, which causes them social and security issues, et cetera, et cetera. So I see where they're going. Key question is how they're going to do it to make sure it's implemented as efficiently as possible, as effectively as possible, as sustainably as possible, and in a manner that does not negatively impact investment on other areas. So for example, so they're not competing with existing private sector investors who've already maybe have related licenses and have deployed capital in those areas.
So speaking of which, just to piggyback on that answer, should this be a private sector initiative then, rather than, I guess, I mean, even if it's public schools,
honestly, it has to be PPP, because private sector would expect government to bear some of the burden associated with being able to get internet to public schools at reasonable cost.
A couple minutes ago, I wanted to quickly get your thoughts on what's happening in Egypt. Egypt, medical or pharmaceutical exports, 35% rise. In this pandemic era, where healthcare is such a top shelf topic, what do you make of what Egypt is doing here?
Well, I think the timing for them is in some ways just perfect, because they started building this city in about 2018, but launched in 2021, and we've seen the impact that's had on the manufacturing of pharmaceuticals. In reality, it's the sick that need doctors. When you have a health crisis, being able to address your own needs and not being dependent. We've seen what's happened when, as nations, we're dependent on outside forces to meet our own healthcare requirements. So it makes a lot of sense, and I'm happy that they're seeing the fruit of their labor.
Is there, what can other nations learn from that? Is it to be serious about investing in manufacturing for pharmaceuticals, to do it in advance, to have a foresight? What's the lesson here, if any?
The lesson here is taking the time to understand what your needs are and planning for your needs, not completely independent of what's going on in the world, but making sure you're able to take care of yourself.
Thank you for that. Well, I just want to get one more question. I'm going back to Kenya now. As schools, you mentioned sustainability for the Kenyan government. Populations continue to increase, schools continue to increase, students and so on. Will governments continue to be behind the 8 ball? Can they ever catch up in spending for education on the public side? How do you see that working out, as long as African populations continue to rise?
Populations, hopefully, will always rise. That is just life. So the plan is thinking through your strategy to ensure that you're not always acting behind the curve. As we just said, Egypt started this building in 2018. So they had it in place at the right time. What else do we need to be doing today, bearing in mind what we know tomorrow and the day after is going to look like? So foresight, you got to have the foresight. Absolutely, and implement on the foresight.
Sandaye Okoli, CEO, Alpha African Advisory, thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you back.